You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
Thanks. We've had a great turnout. This turns our workshops into a more technical. The Iowa City has long realized we've always missed a middle step, or like basic, not middle, but initial step when starting a business. A lot of the business owners that we work with really need that technical support and that guidance when they're starting a business, just to build a solid foundation and to increase your chances of success. And we're great that this seminar or the series happened, and we hope to answer any of your questions. I want to thank our sponsors, in addition to the City of Iowa City, Kirkwood, for leasing the space and being a great partner. Also, Sankofa Outreach Connection for getting the word out and helping us marketing the series, as well as the University of Iowa Community Credit Union Hills and Midwest One. And our final sponsor is Community CPA. They'll be doing the 3 last workshops. And they have over 5,000 clients. They do accounting, business consultation. They are here today. They're going to make a few announcements. If you've already signed up for these classes, you don't have to sign up for that again. But Community CPA does offer additional classes this summer, and they have a sheet for you guys to sign up. But don't get confused with these classes. Like, you're already good to go with these. So, Ying, did you want to come up and say a few words?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Do you know that you guys are crazy? Saturday, you're here. Study technical things, you got to be crazy. But that's okay. New business and a successful business takes crazy people. If you don't belong to that category, you're not going to be successful. And making a couple announcements. And thank you for Iowa City and putting all of us together, have a reason to be together. And we also have a couple of series here and dive in a little more of what business is like when you want to start one. And looking at the date, June 14, June 21, July 5th, and July 12th. In the morning, we have coffee. If you can't make in the evening for that seminar, come in, just get to learn. And so you get a little bit of what we're going to teach in the evening, so you can come in the morning. And we just want to get you to know that when you are in business, you are not alone. You can make friends right here. And in business, it's a lonely game. But if you get to know people, you suddenly feel like you have a family and make good friends with these people who talks, because they are the one knows the stuff. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just some housekeeping items. The restrooms are right outside the hall. The trash can's outside the hall. Please, if you get hungry anytime, take some food that's back there. I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. His name is Ryan Moss. He's a private practice attorney. Ryan.
I'll take it away. Well, like was just said, and I've got a great slide in a little bit that talks about not going it alone. You don't need to be alone, and I think that was a great point, that there are resources around you within the business and startup community. There are business advisors that are ready to help and community resources. So we'll talk about that in a second. Go ahead and let's get to our next slide there. Here's those dates and times for those upcoming workshops. They are all here at this location. Okay. All right, and this is going to be a little bit tricky with the microphone, and I do want to take the time to go around to have everyone. You don't have to tell what business you're thinking of starting or have started, but if you want to, that's fine too. There's some good reasons why you may not want to. You're in a room of crazy entrepreneurs. You may want to keep your best new idea to yourself, and that's okay. But if you share with me and the group what your business idea is, then that helps me give a little more tailored and specific information to you guys here today. But for one thing, for sure, let me know one thing you want to learn from today. Please ask questions. If I don't know the answer, I'd like to get your contact information. I will track down that answer to the best that I can and get it to you. That's part of that kind of resource our community and startup ecosystem that we're trying to build here. These slides and the information I'm presenting today is oriented for making money businesses. If you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, a charity, there are some similarities to for-profit businesses, but there's enough big differences that we're not talking about that today. And we're also only talking about Iowa businesses. Sometimes in my private practice, someone comes to me and says, oh, my friend told me I have to start a Delaware LLC. Well, that's just not true. And for 95% of new business owners, there is no need to go through the kind of the gymnastics of setting up maybe a Nevada corporation. There's these other jurisdictions that people talk about. We're going to talk about Iowa businesses. That means you're forming an Iowa business entity, or at least you're doing business as a sole proprietor here in Iowa. And then this part I've got to say, because I am a licensed attorney, we give advice, but the information that is provided here today is not legal advice. I am not any of your attorney. You're not my clients. I am not your attorney. There's no attorney-client relationship today. It's just general information purposes. Hopefully, though, it gives you some really good tools to go forward and get your business going in the right direction. Also, thanks to our sponsors. We already covered that. Okay, you know why you're here. You want to learn about what sort of legal issues, what sort of landmines are out there when I'm setting up a business that I need to be aware of. And hopefully, I'll cover most of those, at least the ones that you're going to encounter in a general, that most small businesses encounter. And hopefully, you'll leave with at least one new bit of information that's going to make your business more successful. However, everything that I talk about here today hopefully will prompt you to then do your own additional homework. I don't think I have anything in the slideshow that is something that, oh, now I know all the answers, now I have all the information I need, I can go forward, start up a business, and not have to either do additional research or contact a specialist, contact a CPA, contact an attorney. So this is a starting off point, give you some of the vocabulary, some of the concepts that are out there that you then are equipped to understand on your doing your own research. Who am I? Why am I somehow qualified to talk about these issues? I have been a private practice attorney for the last 14 years. Actually 15 now. I had my own firm up in Cedar Rapids, and I left it just in January to go work on a special project for the state of Iowa, their Department of Natural Resources. I will probably return to the full-time private practice of law when the project is over. I graduated law school here at the University of Iowa, did my MBA after law school, and counseling small business owners, startups, folks who have an idea that want to turn it into a reality. That was my bread and butter for my legal practice over those 15 years. So the first one, don't go it alone. Who should you have on your team? And I'm not talking about employees, although that they could be employees. I'm not talking about co-owners, although you might have co-owners. I'm talking about the people around you that you either hire or reach out and network with that can get you good information, insight, bounce ideas off of, help you avoid stepping in those pitfalls. We're going to then talk about setting up your business, running your business, and then some additional topics. I'm not even going to talk about them. I'm going to throw them up on the screen so that you know that there's other information that you should be aware of. And then I do want to save time for questions so we can talk about your own real-life experiences and concerns and questions. Now, These slides should be available in the future if you want to download them. We're going to make them available on the internet somewhere. City of Iowa City, probably? Okay. So there's a lot of information in here that I'm going to gloss over, or I'm going to be talking to you about maybe one or two items, but there's a lot on the screen. The reason there's a lot on the screen is so that when you go and download my presentation later, you've got stuff to fill in the blanks with and don't have to be madly writing. So instead, listen, digest, read what's on the screen, but just know that you'll be able to download this later. Okay, team of advisors. Almost always, most resources for startups say you need to have a team of professional advisors. That usually includes a lawyer, an accountant, an insurance agent, and I put on their mentor, and I don't usually see that. There is what am I trying to say? There are very few new ideas. And what I mean is, the business idea that you have, probably someone somewhere is doing that already. Now that someone somewhere who's doing that already has maybe stepped in those potholes that they can help you avoid. And so reach out to the network of those folks who are already in the business community that are either doing something similar to what you have done. Maybe they used to and have retired. There are a lot of places that mentors can be found. But a mentor is someone who has that experience that can give you that insight, help steer you a little bit, and hopefully you have a good enough relationship with them, a different one than you would have with a lawyer or an accountant, that you can ask them the personal questions about running a business, running your business, and they knowing you can give you answers that are more personal to you. Speaking specifically about lawyers, but it would also apply for accountants, insurance agents, and other professionals, interview them first. When I was in private practice, we would get phone calls all the time, either generated from our website, from the Yellow Pages, that sort of thing. And typically, they would just want to know what basically, can you do this? And how much do you charge? And okay, let's go ahead and do it. They didn't interview a number of different attorneys, and yet you can do that, and you should do that. You should do your research. There's most professionals now have websites, so you can go check out their biographies, see what they work on a regular basis. But I don't think there's any substitute for calling up and speaking to the actual attorney or accountant that you're looking to hire and asking them questions and saying, you know what, I'm going to call a few other people on my list, and I may or may not get back to you. Don't feel bad about that. That's you doing your homework, just like you'd take 3 or 4 bids on a vendor, a supplier for something. You shouldn't be any different with a professional. And it's okay to ask for references. One thing about confidentiality, attorneys have a duty of confidentiality. In other words, we are ethically bound that if you call us, if you're a potential client, we owe you a duty of confidentiality to keep confidential the information you share with us, even if you don't hire us. That doesn't necessarily apply to other professions. The only reason I say that's not bad or good or anything, the only reason I say that is just keep that in mind. Now, like I said earlier, there's not necessarily any new ideas under the sun. So you need to give your potential professional advisor the information they need, complete enough information they need to do their job, to advise you and give you the best advice. But at the same time, keep in mind that you need to basically ask them to give you that promise of confidentiality. The other thing is that clients often do, and this is even experienced clients. In fact, it may be even worse for experienced business people. They like to keep their accountant over here, they like to keep their banker over here, they like to keep their lawyer over here and make sure they don't talk to each other because they're afraid about fees. And that's legitimate. But the thing is, if I don't know what the accountant's doing, if the accountant doesn't know what I'm doing, we could be working on different problems with different end results, which conflict with each other and end up being worse than if we'd all gotten together and come up with a cohesive plan. So you don't see that advice very much, but I would suggest having, especially for a startup, investing in a conference session. Once you've selected an accountant, once you've selected an attorney and any other professionals, bring them together one time so that they know who else is involved, and basically have them set their egos aside and know that they are all there together to work for you, to give you the best advice as part of your team. That's that second. Oh, the other thing, if a lawyer starts throwing out big words, if an accountant starts making all kinds of references to arcane accounting rules and regulations, they're not helping you do your job of making business decisions based on their advice. You can insist on your professionals giving you advice in a way you can understand and act upon. There's others on the team. We have a number of lending institutions as sponsors for this workshop series. A lot of times I would include banker up on the team of advisors. Depends on whether you need outside lending or financing or not. Marketing to design, payroll service provider. If you're going to have employees, even if that employee is yourself under certain business structures, you're going to need to do payroll. And I don't know about you, but I'm in the business of practicing law. I'm not in the business of running payroll. So think about outsourcing, think about a payroll service provider. Most payroll service providers are scaled, and by the way, a number of accounting firms usually provide or can provide this as one of their add-on services. But they can scale that to however small a business you have to whatever big business you have. So just because you're a small business doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense, two negatives, it makes sense to outsource some of that stuff so that you're concentrating on where your new customers are, what's the next product, how am I going to get a competitive advantage in my market over my competitors and make a profit, not figuring out how much I should withhold for my employees for this next month. Financial advisor, pension plan manager, and pre-employment screening service. Those are just some other resources you should think about, particularly as you scale up. This may seem like self-interest, saying that you should spend more on legal startup fees or expenses than you planned, but the fact of the matter is it usually is a good investment to have the right documents drafted for your state, for your business, up front. And that may mean some back and forth with an attorney and accountant. Doesn't have to, and there's a number of online services. We've all probably heard of LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer and those sorts of things. I haven't, but I know of an attorney that has made it a business, a profitable business, fixing Rocket Lawyer LegalZoom documents because they may not be suitable for what they were used for by clients. So just think about the value of having that relationship with an attorney to have the legal documentation drafted properly for the jurisdiction you're in. In this case, we're talking about Iowa. However, to keep legal fees in check, I hesitate to say this, but newer attorneys are embracing a project-based billing or fee system. Now, what that means is client says, I need you to do X. Lawyer says, included with X are these three things, and I'll do them for a fixed price. That gives the business owner some comfort about their legal spending. It gives the attorney a certain amount of fees that they're going to get. And by the way, they may insist on receiving that or at least half of that up front. And that's part of that bargain is you're basically buying a set of services if they are going to take a fixed fee on that, they may insist on at least some of that being paid up front. But I would definitely ask, when you're shopping for professionals, shopping particularly for an attorney, ask them, do you do project-based billing? Can we go on a project-based approach where I have you do a certain set or a certain deliverable, and I'm using language that business people understand, but lawyers sometimes don't understand. So if I'm like a software consultant, I have deliverables for my client. Well, lawyers do too. We just don't think of it in deliverable terms. But ask potential lawyers if they will be willing to do a project-based billing approach for you. And that is a way to contain legal fees so it's not open-ended on an hourly basis. A lot of lawyers, most lawyers, I still do, charge on an hourly basis. However long it takes me to take, if someone calls me, whatever, I just keep track of the time and bill based on the amount of time that I have involved on a client's project. But I also do project-based billing, particularly for those sorts of standard things, setting up someone's LLC, setting up someone's S-Corp, and we'll talk about those things in a second. I'll do those usually on a fixed fee, particularly if it's a single owner. When we're talking about multiple owners, co-owners, you're going in on a new business with your friend, that's more complicated. Another way to contain legal fees is do some of your own work, but then have it checked by an attorney. Invest in that hour that it might take for an attorney to look over the documents you've prepared, rather than having an attorney do it all from scratch. And make sure you get your agreement with them in writing. Go ahead. Now, there's a separate, and I'm not going to talk about licenses because there's a separate workshop on licenses. But before you even run down to, well, nobody goes to the Secretary of State's office in person anymore, but before you file articles of incorporation, before you hop on Rocket Lawyer, LegalZoom, and do your certificate of organization for your new limited liability company, think about these two things, at least. If nothing else, think about these two things. What do I need license-wise at the local level? The city has licenses that you might need to get. The state has licenses you might need to get, or permits, like a sales tax permit, or a hairdresser's license. There are a number of different businesses that are very small businesses that still need a license of some sort. Usually it means just filling out a form and paying a fee, but you still have to get that license. Otherwise, if you're operating, you're operating illegally. And so I would encourage you to make time to attend the license workshop, which I forget, they're all here, aren't they?
Oh, yes. Next one.
Yep, that's next Tuesday at 7 p.m. This is the other thing, business name. So there are tons of stories of someone who picked a great catchy name, started doing business, maybe built up a brand identity, recognition in their community for their business, only to get a letter 2 years later from some big business long ways away saying, you are infringing on our trademarks, stop. And guess what? They probably can stop you. So what does that mean? That means that reputation you have in the community, to say nothing of any money you paid a graphic designer to come up with your great logo or whatever, is down the tubes. And you've got to start from scratch to rebuild a brand. Now, sometimes you can work out an arrangement, a licensing arrangement or whatever with that existing owner of that trademark, but do your homework first. You can do a lot of it yourself. There are attorneys that help. There are also just plain trademark search firms that can do that for you, but Google's a beautiful thing. And you can do a lot of this research on your own. The other place I would check, I don't have this up there, uspto.gov. uspto.gov. That's the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And that's the repository for all federally registered trademarks. That doesn't include trademarks that people are using without having registered them. It doesn't include trademarks that people have just registered at the state level, state of South Dakota, state of Iowa, whatever. It's just the federal ones, but guess what? If it's registered at the federal level, there are some serious penalties for infringing on it. So it's like a great first cut, first check. Now, one reason why there's the reason for businesses that will sell you trademark search services, doing a search at the uspto.gov is not the easiest thing in the world. It's a complex interface, but you can do it. People do it. So go there, do a Google search, see if your name that you're planning to use or your brand for your product, and this is, I'm getting to my next point here, is already in use, and it will save you so much trouble and expense later. Because guess what? If you go file your articles of incorporation with a great business name only to then find out 2 or 3 years later that guess what? Your business name is actually a trademark of someone who has it nationally registered, you may be able to keep your corporation's name, but you won't be able to use it on any of your products or your services or on your sign out front. So do your homework first. Now, business names versus trademarks. If I start a business that's a corporation or an LLC or something, or even a DBA, but I'm mainly talking legal names of businesses, that's the name of the corporation, and it can go by other names, and it may create trademarks. Trademark is what someone uses, what the public uses, to recognize the source of a product. Oh, that's a Subway restaurant. I know what I'm going to get at a Subway restaurant. This trademark right here isn't, well, it actually is technically owned by a company called Subway IP Inc., but Subway originally was Doctors Associates Inc. It just it had a trademark called Subway that the whole public recognized, but that wasn't the name of the corporation, and that's the point I'm making. You can have a corporate name that's different from the trademarks it uses, and sometimes that makes sense. But for the most part, people start a business with the name they plan to advertise under, and you want to make sure that what you're advertising isn't what someone else already has, or else they can hammer you. That's called suing for infringement. They can have you destroy products that have an infringing brand name on it. You can pay fines to them. You certainly would have legal defense costs. You may have to pay their legal costs if they're successful. So it pays to put the time in to do the work in advance to make sure you're not using someone else's name or logo. Registration of a business name. If you're going to just be in business and not form any sort of limited liability entity like a business, like a corporation or an LLC, you're just going to be in business yourself. You go down to the county recorder's office, fill out a form with your business name, pay $7, and you've got your DBA, your business, called a trade name. All other names, like Doctors Associates for the company that started Subway, because you're filing a new business entity, you do that at the Secretary of State's office, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Trademark registration, once you're up and running, it would be good advice to register any sort of brands or names that you're using. That way you're protecting yourself for someone infringing on you later. Okay.
Can I ask, is there ever a scenario where someone would have registered as a sole proprietor here locally and then also with the Secretary of State's office?
Okay, so the question was, is there a situation where someone would have registered locally as a sole proprietor but then also at the Secretary of State's office? The one situation I can think of for that would be where they registered their DBA, their trade name, for their sole proprietor business. And I'm going to use as an example my mom. My mom, bless her heart, she sells plants, house plants that she raises at her local farmer's market. To my knowledge, she hasn't formed Marion's Houseplants Inc. or Marion's Houseplants LLC. She sells at the farmer's market. So that's a sole proprietorship. If she was wanting to have a label on her plants that said Marion's Houseplants, if she were here in Johnson County, she would go down to the recorder's office and file that trade name. Now, if Marion's Houseplants became enough of a brand in her mind that warranted protecting it, because everyone was looking for Marion's Houseplants, and they wondered did you get that plant from Marion? Well, yeah, look, the plant has a label on it that says Marion's Houseplants. Then Marion, my mom, may want to go to the state and file a trademark registration at the state. But what you wouldn't typically have is a sole proprietor then also filing a business entity creation document at the Secretary of State's office. That would be if you're forming or organizing an LLC or a corporation.
So they'd be switching their type of business entity at that point.
That's right. Yep, you'd be going from a sole proprietor business, Marion's Houseplants, to Marion's Houseplants LLC.
You used the term DBA several times. What does it?
Thank you for pointing that out. Doing business as, and that's short. And you guys call me on any jargon or abbreviations that I use that you don't know. Feel free to point that out. Doing business as. So, because doing business as is a long phrase, most people just refer to it as a DBA. The proper name for it is either a trade name or a fictitious name. But most people call them DBAs. And it's the go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. So let's just say if your mom filed LLC in the state level
Uh-huh.
from the first place,
Yep.
and she goes to Linn County or Johnson County, she doesn't have to file anymore. Right? She
That's
just goes.
that's correct. So
She's in Iowa, is that right?
That's right. The question was if my mom filed her business as an LLC in the first place, didn't deal with filing a trade name for a sole proprietor at the county, and instead filed it as an LLC at the state, would she have to file then anything in Linn County if she wanted to go to the Linn County Farmers Market? And the answer is no. Now, if she wanted to go to Chicago and have a regular business, the reason I say regular is because there's a little gray ground about only doing it once. But if she wanted to go to the farmers market in Chicago every weekend, she probably would need to file a document in Illinois to allow her to do business in Illinois. Yep.
What's the difference between an S corp and a C corp?
So the question was, what's the difference between an S corp and a C corp? I hope, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I hope that's one of the topics at a later workshop, the tax workshop. The tax workshop that's the 31st, choosing the right tax structure. I will talk a little bit about that. The big difference between an LLC and an S corp comes down to how much tax or what kind of taxes you pay at the federal and also the state level at the end of the year on your income. It's lots more, not complex, but more nuanced than that. But that's the big difference. They're both what are called pass-through entities. That means that you don't pay tax on either of those entities. You don't pay tax on the income at the entity level. You only pay it at the personal level. It flows, basically the income flows through to the owner. So in that way they're similar. But the big differences are tax-wise, what you're responsible for and what you can do with an S corp versus an LLC. There's also some other important structural differences which I will talk about. Those are some of the legal differences, and I'll get to that. LLC, register at the state, you can do it you can then conduct business wherever. Yep?
If everybody has the potential to do business in all states or even internationally.
Yep.
Would you have to file or register in each place that you want to go, or is there something that you can do that will cover all of it?
Another good question. The question was, if you're going to be doing business in other states or even internationally, is there something you have to file in all those other states or jurisdictions in order to do that? Each state has its own rules about when companies or businesses coming from outside the state have to register. The general rule is if you're doing regular business there in that jurisdiction, Yes, you'd have to register, and companies do it here in Iowa all the time. They file a foreign registration. It's foreign only because they're coming from a different state, not because they're coming from a different country, although it would cover that too. If you're operating physical businesses on a regular basis in other states, then typically you would. If you're selling on the internet like Etsy or something like that, typically you don't, because what's happening is you're producing the good here in Iowa, you're doing the business here in Iowa, you're using presumably post office, UPS, delivery service to ship, so you're performing the business here in Iowa. And you're getting an order from online from someone in another jurisdiction, but they're basically, in a virtual way, coming to Iowa to buy something from you. So, and I don't want to go down too much down the road of getting into the details of online business, but there are some special situations for online business. Some of the things like sales tax. I'm not qualified, and this isn't the right forum to talk about collecting sales tax on internet transactions, but that would be an issue. But as far as you have to register in other jurisdictions only if you're there on a regular basis doing regular business, typically, but it varies state by state. Internationally, I don't know. Okay. Go ahead and click it one more time. Okay, go up, please. All right. There was supposed to be a taxi driving across. There we go. Click it again. Oh. Anyway, you can go back to the taxi screen. There we go. I worked like 20 minutes on that. Okay. The reason I had the taxi cab on there was a great, there's a story, I don't know if it's a real story or not, but the classic example of why you don't want to just be a sole proprietor is a taxi business. Person has a taxi cab, they become successful, maybe they have a couple taxis, they have people driving for them. One of their drivers hits a pedestrian. The owner of the taxi business never bothered to form a business entity, and guess what? The person who was injured by their taxi driver, oh my goodness, I just looked at the clock. Okay, the person who was injured by their taxi driver is suing them personally. And except for things that are shielded, like in Iowa, your house is shielded, but guess what? Your car is not. So if you don't have that liability shield that comes with forming a business entity, then you can be sued for harms occurring through your business, and you can be sued personally, and they can take your stock portfolio, they can take your coin collection, they can take your boat. I know, that's a big deal for some people. With an LLC, with a limited liability company, that could be a corporation, could be an LLC, there's instances when they can still reach through, but generally, the big benefit, and the reason you have a business, corporation, or an LLC, is to make sure that only the assets, only the business assets, the inventory, the equipment, the accounts receivable that are part of your business are what are exposed to that liability. Huge, huge benefit. Now, there's some exemptions. Most banks will require you to sign a personal guarantee if you're taking out a loan. Unless you have so much good collateral and you say, if you make me sign a personal guarantee, I'm going to go to the next bank down the street. But generally, a bank that's going to loan a small business owner money, startup, you don't have any track record, you don't have any assets, collateral, that sort of thing, they're going to have you sign a personal guarantee. Well, guess what? If you don't pay that loan back, they will and can and will sue you personally. So that's one issue where a limited liability entity won't help you because you've voluntarily taken that shield down. But the bank knows that is a power than they have to motivate you to pay their loan. So it makes sense. Another instance when that shield comes down is if you.
I have a question.
Yep.
So that you take that shield down for the bank and the loan.
Yep.
But that's still, it has you protected against any other situation, right? Where like somebody would sue you outside of, doing
Absolutely.
that, right?
Yep. So the question was, you take that shield down for purposes of the bank loan and the personal guarantee. Does that mean your shield's down for the whole world? No. Your shield stays up for the taxi driver that runs into someone. Those sorts of issues, as long as the taxi driver wasn't you, the owner, and as long as you weren't maybe intoxicated. So intentional harm, and that could be more broadly to really reckless behavior. But if you're using your business to commit fraud, good example might be, there's a number of fraud schemes perpetrated on the elderly. If you're using your business to perpetuate that fraud scheme, guess what? The Attorney General's office isn't going to care that you were doing it through an LLC or a corporation. They're going to go after you personally. As well, I think we all in the room would agree they should be able to. Different options for your business. Sole proprietor we already talked about. Partnership. I have this on here. I haven't set up any partnerships. No one comes to me and says, well, I take it back. There's some situations where a partnership makes sense. A lot of single special purpose like real estate investment ventures where you have maybe two already existing business entities going in on a project. That could be a situation where a partnership would make sense. But hopefully for everyone in the room who wants to start up their own business that they're doing themselves, selling a product, selling a service to the community, a partnership doesn't make sense. You still have, in most cases with partnerships, you still have that personal liability. So it doesn't give you that liability shield. If you go to this link, the Iowa Bar Association has a little pamphlet that talks about some of the benefits of the different business forms, and that's why I don't want to spend any more time on that. Go ahead. Just some vocabulary. Limited liability company owners are called members. You can call them owner, you can call them partners or whatever, but really technically they're called members. They're easy to set up. Tax-wise, they're pretty easy to handle. If you're a single owner for an LLC, just goes right through on your personal return. And the forms to set an LLC up for a single owner are pretty simple. Usually a half page. So and I think on the next slide, in Iowa you you start an LLC by filing a certificate of organization with the Secretary of State. Now remember, these should be all on the internet later. File a certificate of organization. The amount of information that has to be on that, you can do in a half page. So it's super simple. Costs $50 to file, and at a minimum, you have to have the name of the company, which has to have either LLC or limited or LC, what I have up there. You got to have that in the business name, and it has to be able to be told apart from existing businesses filed in Iowa. Also has to have street and mailing address for the registered office and registered agent. Registered agent is the person, and it has to be a physical address, not a P.O. box. But the registered agent is the person, or it could be a company too, that can get the lawsuit papers when your business gets sued. And there is a saying that says, you're not really in business until you've been sued. So in order, but the whole idea is to not get sued. But if you do get sued, the state says, we need to know for this business who we can have the sheriff serve papers with. Serve papers on. That's the registered agent. That's basically the only role that they have. And for almost all small businesses, it's the owner. It doesn't mean that you're personally liable. It just means that you're the address that someone can serve papers on you. Next slide. Oh, wait, let's go back. Important point. There are other important documents that aren't mandatory, like an operating agreement and minutes. There are other documents that are good to have, because they give your business that much more formality. That lends it to that it helps with that liability shield, that this business is separate from its owner. So how do you prove that it's separate? Well, you have written corporate records. You have basically bylaws for an LLC. It's called an operating agreement. You have minutes. They're pretty simple. They're pretty standard. You should be able to find an attorney that does them easily for you, kind of as a package deal. I'm saying about $300 for a single owner LLC. If you have a co-owner, different story. There's more involved with having a business that has multiple owners, and you probably won't be able to find a lawyer that sets one up for that $300. But $300, yep.
I just had a question about this is about setting up a brand new LLC.
Correct.
If you're taking over for an existing business, is there paperwork that you have to file when you're transferring ownership, or is it completely different?
Sure. So the question was, this is for setting up a new business. If you're taking over someone else's business or an existing business, is there paperwork you have to file? The short answer is it definitely depends. Depends on whether you are buying that business, and I don't know, maybe this is something we want to talk about offline, but if you're buying a business, particularly if it has employees, you need to tell the state agencies for workforce development that the ownership has changed. You also, for your own protection, if you're buying that business, you want to have a written purchase agreement between the seller and the buyer that documents what's being sold, inventory, who knows what. But that doesn't have to get filed anywhere. So I'm just, there's things that have to get reported in a sale.
Transferring ownership and transferring the name on the documents.
Right.
Filing brand new paperwork.
Right. And but the other important thing I need to point out, there's different ways to buy a business. Lots of times, in fact, almost in all cases, when we handled buying of a business, and we did it all the time, we do it all the time, we would have, if our client is the buyer, we would have them set up a brand new LLC or corporation that then bought the business assets of the seller, including the name quite possibly. But it would be a new company that would buy the assets, and there's a number of good reasons for that, both tax-wise and legal-wise. If instead you're buying, let's assume this is a business it's not a sole proprietorship. If you're buying the stock or the ownership interests, that's a different transaction. That you're basically jumping literally into the shoes of the previous owner. And there you wouldn't need to do transfers of name, transfers of sales tax accounts, that sort of thing, because you're buying the stock of the business. Instead, if you're setting up a new entity and buying the assets of the business, and then you're going to use those to run your own business, which, by the way, is the smarter way to go about it, but it may not make sense in all cases.
You'd be doing a DBA on that because you'd be starting your own and then doing business as that.
Yep, but typically what you would do is part of the purchase would be purchasing that name. And so then you would just notify the Secretary of State, hey, guess what? ABC LLC now owns this DBA, this fictitious name. So, yeah, there might be good reasons to not use their business name if they have a poor reputation, that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you'd want to transfer it, but I don't know if you guys going to talk in the tax program about acquiring businesses, stock versus asset sales, that sort of stuff?
We talk about accounting and the tax treatment to that.
Okay.
These are dollar things that it's important to the business owner.
Yeah. So there are tax reasons why, as a buyer, you'd want to do it as an asset sale. There's also business reasons. If there are a classic example in that case, and then we're going to wrap this particular question up. The classic example in that case is if the business has, if someone has sued that business. Well, that's actually not a good example. If there's an environmental liability on that business, if you buy the stock of that business, you step into those shoes and you got that environmental liability. If, on the other hand, you start your own new business and simply buy the assets, and there is true arm's length separation between you and the owners of the selling business, you don't take those liabilities. You just are buying the assets, and the liabilities are left behind with that selling entity. Another good reason is if there are employee issues that you want to have a brand new entity be the employer, you may not want to step into the shoes of the seller where they have maybe existing employment contracts with employees you don't intend to keep. So each situation is totally different. Hopefully I've given a few examples of why it might make sense to start your new business and buy those assets. Proceed. I talked about a little bit the recommended formalities, having an operating agreement, that sort of thing. You do need to file a quick paper with the Secretary of State every other year and pay $45. It's cheaper if you do it online to keep the LLC in good standing. And you want to do that because if it is no longer in good standing, it can get dissolved, and guess what? Your shield has just dropped. So keep it in good standing. File they're called biennial reports. Secretary of State will send you a reminder as long as you keep your address updated with them. I had quite a few projects reinstating dissolved businesses because they didn't update the Secretary of State's office and didn't remember to file their biennial reports. There are some cons. This is the one I want to mainly focus on because this is a tax issue. People think LLC, oh, super easy, I don't have to do much for paperwork. Well, guess what? That can lead to habits where you maybe got the LLC's checkbook and you got to run to the grocery store, so you just whip the LLC's checkbook out because you don't practice that separation. You don't keep formal minutes. You don't have to. It's a good practice to keep formal minutes. It's a good practice to have an operating agreement, but a lot of times people select an LLC because those aren't mandatory. And then they kind of forget that the LLC is an entity different from them. And when you start disregarding these corporate formalities, the fact that you shouldn't use the LLC's checkbook for your own groceries can lead to that shield getting dropped. I know. S-Corp's more involved. You still file a document with the Secretary of State that's called Articles of Incorporation. The prices are the same, for now at least, but you do need to keep annual meeting minutes. You're supposed to have bylaws, and you don't actually have to issue certificates, but you keep track of the owner's stake in the company in the form of shares. I think let's keep going. These will all be on the web. There's a lot of additional paperwork. Tax-wise, you got to file tax returns even if you're the sole owner of the S-Corp. You've got to timely file an election form telling the IRS that you want to be an S-Corp. It's not complicated, and there's ways to do it retroactively, but you still need to file that form. Here's another important thing to keep in mind. S-Corps can only be owned by U.S. citizens or resident aliens. Either have a green card or you spend 183 days in the last calendar year. I think that's the reg. In the U.S. If you don't, then if you don't meet either of these categories, then you can't be an S-Corp owner. There may be good reasons not to be an S-Corp owner, but if you want to be an S-Corp owner, you've got to be either a U.S. citizen or resident alien. The other thing is you've got to, if you make a profit and you own it with somebody else and you own it 50-50, profits have to be distributed 50-50. You can't adjust that, whereas in an LLC, taxed as a partnership, again, we're getting to the tax issues, but taxed as a partnership, you can shift that around. Maybe if one of the owners came with all the money at the beginning, but you had the great idea, and you want to pay the owner with the money, maybe the first $100,000 of profit, you can't do that with an S-Corp. Because If a dollar of profit comes in, 50 or whatever the ownership percentage is, has to go to one owner or the other. Okay. Same thing, biennial report. Now, you also need to get an EIN, also called a tax ID number. There's an online wizard that the IRS has that can walk you through that process. It takes about 15 minutes. When I was setting up LLCs or corporations for people, I just offered that registration as part of the service. Most accounting firms will do it for you too. You can do it yourself, but you'll need to know what your form of business is going to be before you do that, because it asks for that. Question?
If you set yourself up as a sole proprietor and you already have an EIN, can you switch that to a
Great ringtone.
LLC, or do you need to get a different EIN when you establish an LLC?
Different one. I think you need, the question was, if you already have an EIN for your sole proprietorship and you're wanting to now incorporate or form an LLC, do I need to get a new EIN? And the question is yes. I almost always, right? Yeah. Yeah. If you're converting from, say, an LLC to an S Corp, you might not need a new EIN, but going from sole proprietor to an LLC, you would. Okay. You'll need that EIN, by the way, to set up your bank account. Bank will ask for it and insist on it. Insurance. Important, important, important. Have insurance. This is why the insurance agent is one of your advisors. Now, you can shop around for insurance. I'm not an insurance expert. I don't know what current rates are for different products, but you at least want to have what's called CGL, Commercial General Liability. It also makes sense to have property and auto. If you can spare the money, it's a good investment to also have an umbrella policy for yourself. It's called an umbrella policy because it's kind of over other insurance, and it's a backstop to protect you in case, for whatever reason, you didn't read your policy documents close enough and realize there's a gap in coverage. Something isn't covered, your umbrella policy probably will catch it. But if you have the money, it's a good investment to have an umbrella policy. There's also errors and omissions. As an attorney, other professionals usually have errors and omissions insurance. We usually call it professional malpractice or liability insurance. You may want to also think about, we're in tornado country, we're in flood country, you may want to also think about a disaster preparedness plan. What happens if downtown Cedar Rapids is flooded, which has happened, and businesses were not able to operate for 2 months, 6 months? Have a disaster preparedness plan in place, and insurance may be part of that. Co-owners. I'm going to really race through stuff now. If at all possible, there are good reasons to have co-owners, but in general, small business, you have much more flexibility if you can maintain sole ownership of your business. You have competing interests. You technically should have separate lawyers when you're setting up a business, but most lawyers will act for all parties and just say that, hey, you have conflicts of interest here. All of these things. How are management decisions going to be made? What happens if someone wants to leave? How do we split profits? How do we decide to buy that truck we're going to need for deliveries? One person wants to buy it, the other owner doesn't want to buy it. They want to continue to use their personal vehicles. Those decisions, if you don't have a written agreement, can get you tied in knots. So hammer it out in the beginning. What happens if one of the co-owners dies? You could end up being business partners with their spouse. Now, if you've thought about being in business with someone else, think about what it'd be like to run your business with their spouse questioning all your decisions. An ownership agreement, a shareholders agreement, a buy-sell agreement, there's different ways we call it. So much easier to do that at the beginning than when there's a lot of money at stake after you've been running a successful business for 4 or 5 years, and then people dig in because there's money at stake to fight about. Do it in that honeymoon period when everybody's in love with everyone else and you've started a new business and things are great, but there's no money to fight over. Called a buy-sell agreement or a shareholders agreement. Next slide. 6 major reasons why that liability shield comes down. You don't file your biennial reports. You don't keep regular minutes. Now, remember, for an LLC, you don't have to, but it's a good practice. You don't put enough money in at the beginning, and this is an interesting one that has lots of gray area. We typically recommended, say $1,500 to begin with, at least in the checking account. But depending on what your business is, you may need to put in more so that you have adequate capitalization. You also need to respect that business as separate. If you're signing a check, signing a contract, next to your name put president, manager, CEO. Don't take your business checking account to the grocery store and buy your own groceries with it. That's commingling funds. Putting someone writes you a check, they've just bought some stuff from your business, and you put it in your personal checking account, that's commingling funds. That then says to the court, if this ever gets fought over, you weren't really treating this business, you weren't respecting it as a separate entity, and we won't now either, and we'll let the people sue you personally. Again, fraud and criminal activity or personal guarantee. I think business plans and financial statements are going to be talked about at another workshop. If you go borrow money, you're going to need to know what you propose as collateral. You may not have any collateral. That would typically be an unsecured loan. Credit cards are unsecured loans, basically. But think about what the collateral is, because if the collateral the bank wants to have is what you need to operate your business, you better make sure that you perform on that loan so that the bank, which would be entitled to come and take the collateral, doesn't have to. Otherwise, you won't have a way to earn the money to pay the loan or pay anybody else. So think carefully and negotiate collateral. You can negotiate this stuff. You can shop banks. Now, that being said, very rarely will a bank loan you significant funds for your business without some collateral and probably without that personal guarantee. But remember, personal guarantee means personal liability. Talking about investors and crowdfunding, there's actually, as of November in 2015, the SEC, which is in Washington, D.C., part of the federal government, approved new rules regarding crowdfunding. Pretty exciting time to be in small business, but partly because we're actually already over time, but also because that's a pretty complicated area of law. Offering stock in your business to investors, hire a qualified attorney. Not all attorneys practice in what's called securities law. That's stocks, LLC ownership interests, that sort of thing. Now, if you're going into business with a partner, you don't need a securities attorney because there's some exceptions to securities laws. They're still considered securities, but there's some exceptions to that sort of thing. But if you're going out and you're soliciting people to invest in your business, talk to a securities attorney first. You may be able to do it without them, but check with them first. Next slide, please. Think about facilities. What sorts of businesses are allowed in your area, at the facility, at the location you want to do your business at? Also think about leases. Leases can be negotiated and should be negotiated. Avoid long-term leases. I would call long-term anything over a year. If you want, you can get an option to renew. Negotiate an option to renew. But don't be stuck in a long-term lease, because guess what? The reality is most small businesses have troubles and some fail. And guess what? If you close up shop, but you have a 3-year lease, and you're only 6 months into it, the landlord can insist that you pay the rest of the rent that would be otherwise due the remainder of those 3 years. Try to limit your liability, and they typically will have asked you to sign personally. try to limit that by having a short-term lease. If you can get away with less than a year, try. Generally, a landlord will insist on a year lease. Okay. May want to have an attorney look it over. Same sort of principles with other contracts, suppliers, customers. Consider including an arbitration clause. Arbitration isn't a silver bullet. Arbitration still costs money, and a lot of times arbitration actually costs more to file, and it's getting less and less quick. It used to be that arbitration, people would prefer arbitration because it was a fast process. It is no longer really fast, and it certainly isn't cheap, and it usually involves lawyers. So there are some good reasons to have it. I say consider it. Don't necessarily always default to it. One way to save money, do your own contracts and pay a lawyer an hour or two to look them over for you after you've done the legwork, rather than have them do it from scratch, and rather than just doing it yourself without that legal review. Next slide. Employees. State and federal agencies are starting to look more and more carefully at independent contractors. If you have people working for you, and you tell them when to show up, and you tell them when they can leave, and you tell them how to do their job, and you give them equipment and materials to do their jobs with, guess what? Even if you call them an independent contractor, they are not an independent contractor. You need to pay unemployment insurance and do withholding from their paycheck, or you will be in big trouble. So think about employees or workers and whether they fit into that independent contractor role or an employee. Independent contractors typically do work for multiple employers. If I'm an independent contractor, I'm a specialist. I might be an IT guy, and I do IT services for them and them and them, and I bring my own equipment, my own tools, my own expertise. I show up when it works into my schedule. I'm an independent contractor. If instead I'm basically only working for one person and I come to their place to do the work, and I work on their workstation with their tools and equipment, I'm probably an employee. And as business owners, think about that when you think about hiring employees. Consider at least a written agreement that covers their pay and says that has a confidentiality clause. Lots of people also talk about, have a non-compete clause in there too. The fact of the matter is, non-competes, I have contested them successfully because it is not favored for us to keep people from earning a living, even if that means they've left you and gone to work for someone else. Now, if they had significant customer contacts, they were out in the community building your brand, and they were regularly talking about the same customer or talking to the same customers that now later they're working for someone else and taking those customers away, those sorts of roles make sense to have a non-compete agreement. But generally, having a non-compete agreement for everyone that you hire, even someone who's maybe working in the kitchen, if you're in food prep or restaurant business, it doesn't make sense and it's not enforceable. And the fact is, if you have one for everybody and you don't enforce it for them, for one person, you'll have a tough time enforcing it against someone else. So non-competes are not a all one size fits all, always do it all the time. Think about it carefully. Minimum wage. Most of you know Johnson County has increased its minimum wage. Next slide. Try to write stuff down. I have here, document everything that goes on in the business. When in doubt, write it down. Doesn't have to get filed with anybody necessarily. Just keep it in your corporate records. You're hiring someone. You're buying a big piece of equipment. You're taking out a loan. Do a quick memo. Maybe call it a resolution, owner or a shareholder's resolution, but document everything. The other thing is guard your intellectual property. If you have customer lists, marketing plans, great new ideas, source code for an app, keep it locked up somehow, either password protected if it's on a computer, maybe even encrypted, if it's on paper in a locked file cabinet, and have employees or workers that will be touching it sign that confidentiality paperwork. If you don't guard it, if you don't take reasonable safeguards, you might lose trade secret protection for that later if someone else gets their hands on it and uses it to their benefit. Next slide, please. things can and do go wrong. I'm not going to go through this slide. But if you have signs of trouble financially, try to line up a time with a bankruptcy attorney. Not saying you're going to file bankruptcy, not saying you'd be eligible for bankruptcy, but if you speak to them a month before things really go south, they have much more ability to help you than if the bank is coming the next day to take your truck. Try to get ahead of troubles. By the way, you can also work with your lenders. If you are on a loan with a bank and you're getting into dangerous waters, lots of bankers will work with you, and here's why. It's cheaper for them to work with you and you ultimately continue to repay and pay off your loan than for them to chase you, sue you, and then take your equipment and collateral and try and sell it and get back what they loaned you. So generally they will work with you to a point. Be reasonable with them. Understand their objective is to get repaid. Here's additional issues. Take a picture of that.
I will.
Because I'm not going to talk about it. It will be in the slides online. There's lots of stuff, franchises, things like that, that we're not going to get into. But now you've seen some of these terms, and if you do some research, you'll recognize that they are issues to consider. Next slide, please. Takeaways. Do additional research. There's lots of resources out there online. When I was preparing for this presentation, I was amazed at how much good information is out there. In fact, I really didn't find any bad information. I didn't find it all in one place. But there's lots of good information out there. There's a booklet back there produced by the SBA. Once you get past all the photographs of different SBA officials, the last half of that booklet has some really good information that can help you. Don't try to do things as a sole proprietor if you're going to have a business that you're trying to earn a living with. And even if you're not having a business, it always makes sense to have a limited liability entity, whether that's an LLC or a corporation. Typically for small business, it'd be an S-Corp. Don't be afraid to spend at least a little money, smart money, on an accountant, on an attorney, to help you in your specific situation. Keep records. Don't commingle. Those are some of the takeaways. Now, thanks to the sponsors, and I am happy to stick around until about 12:15, which is an hour away, to answer questions, but we are officially past time.
Do you have a business card?
I do not have a business card.
That's good to know.
I do not have a business card. I do have a law practice, Business Matters, which is a DBA, a fictitious name for Moss Law Office. But because I am employed full-time as a temporary employee for the state of Iowa, I am not taking lots of new clients. I might 18 months from now. Yes?
Well, thank you first of all for coming. One question, to set up a medical practice to protect myself against other lawsuits that you mentioned it already, what is that the LLC is the best way?
Okay, the question was, in setting up a medical practice or a healthcare practice of some sort, what is the best entity? It may be partly driven by the board that might regulate your kind of healthcare services. Most dental practices, ophthalmologists, medical doctor practices are set up as what are called professional corporations. That's the PC right here, professional corporation. Now, they can also be set up as professional LLCs. PLLC, you might see that abbreviation. And that's mostly a tax issue as long as you respect these corporate formalities, keeping separate books, separate accounts, things like that, and your board that governs your kind of practice, your kind of healthcare practice, allows you to maybe use an LLC, you could use an LLC, and it would depend a lot on tax advice in that case. But both would work. Yes?
I'm thinking about going into food business.
Do you want to? Yeah, here.
I'm thinking about going to food business. I'm thinking to go with my husband and my sister-in-law, 3 of us, but I'm hesitating to get a single LLC versus a partnership. But if I know they're going to help me a lot, so am I supposed to hire them as employees or just take them as partners?
Great question. So the right answer to that is whatever you do, have it in writing. Even if it's a simple agreement that you're going to do this and be compensated with X, maybe it's pay per hour, maybe it's just some amount of money, maybe it is, I don't know. But document it so that everyone understands if they're not entitled to ownership in the business, they don't come back later and say, hey, remember when I helped you set up your business? You promised me that I would have a part in your business. I'd have a part of your company. Now give me my share in the company. You want to, if that's not your intent, it's a good thing to document that up front so that everybody's clear. Now, you can, and it may make sense to have them have a small percentage ownership in your business in exchange for providing some sort of services in helping you get started or running it. If they're running it or if they're helping you run it on a regular basis, you need to think about treating them as employees. And frankly, if your business is going to be successful and you don't want to share ownership, it's worth the additional administration, hassle, paperwork to treat them as employees, unless they qualify as independent contractors, but I doubt that they would qualify as independent contractors. There's issues with co-owners, even minority owners, minority having small, not controlling ownership, that the majority owner, you in this case, owe them, you need to treat them fairly. So if you are the sole owner, you can do whatever you want with the business as far as how it gets run, basically as long as you abide by the law. But once you have co-owners, even if they're not controlling, even if they have only 5% of your business, you start owing them a duty of care, fiduciary duty is what we call it, to make sure that they're treated fairly. There's lots of litigation, lots of lawsuits about minority owners that have 20%, 10%, maybe had a job with the business, were fired because maybe they didn't do their job well. Any number of reasons, but they were fired and then kind of frozen out of the company. Maybe the person in your shoes, the owner, made sure that the owner bonused out all the profits to themselves so that their co-owners didn't get anything at the end of the year because it all went to salary or bonus. And then those low percentage owners would come back and say, you should have paid me my share of the profits. And that's something that you can avoid by simply paying them as employees rather than giving them a stake in the business.
But the employees, you have to...
What's that?
20 an hour. Oh, that's my husband.
Yeah. Anything over $9.15 in Johnson County.
But the employees, you have to deal with this whole 9 yards of this, withholding all of this filing stuff, right? That's
why having a payroll service, shopping around and having a payroll service to handle it can be worth it in the long run.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.